Buenas tardes. Pues bienvenidas a la sesión 29 del Seminario Gobernando lo Urbano. Hoy tenemos el gusto de recibir a la doctora Sophie Didier, que nos va a hablar de, pues me encanta el título de su presentación, Abajo el césped, una mirada de los talleres de formación sobre jardinería seca en el sur de California y algunos enfoques teóricos para interpretar la política del césped. Sophie Didier es doctora en geografía por la Universidad París I y profesora de universidad en la Escuela de Urbanismo de París. Está adscrita al Laboratorio de Acción Colectiva Urbana, la BURBA, de la Universidad Gustave Eiffel, y actualmente está en comisión en el CNRS-University of Arizona Iglobes. En otras palabras, está en Tucson, Arizona, por unos años como directora adjunta, como vicedirectora de un laboratorio del CNRS, que es el Consejo Nacional de Investigación Científica de Francia, allá en la Universidad de Arizona. Sus áreas de investigación comprenden la geografía, la arquitectura, la planificación, administración del espacio en las ciudades de América del Norte y del sur de África. Pasó unos años también dirigiendo un laboratorio CNRS en Johannesburg y, bueno, trabaja temas como, pues ha publicado recientemente múltiples libros y artículos, entre otros, Governing Street Trading in Post-Apartheid Cape Town, peripheral centralities in Val d'Europe, east of Paris, the logics of assemblage between Disneyland Paris and New Town Principles of Planning, Disneyland Anaheim and COVID-19, trying times for the tourism-oriented growth coalition, politics and community-based research perspectives from Yeovil Studio, Johannesburg, que es un libro realmente maravilloso en donde han trabajado mucho con talleres y cartografía participativa. Entonces, pues Sophie nos va a dar su presentación y después vamos a tener un comentario por parte de Adriana Zárate Escobar, estudiante del doctorado en estudios urbanos y ambientales aquí en el CEDUA del Colegio de México, maestra en Ciencias Sociales por la Facultad Latinoamericana de Ciencias Sociales y licenciada en Relaciones Internacionales por el Colegio de San Luis, parte de la 19 generación de la Escuelita de Derechos Humanos del Centro Victoria. Potosina, feminista, activista de guardianas de la Sierra de San Miguelito, defensora de derechos ambientales y territoriales. Sus principales líneas de investigación son espacio y movimientos sociales, derecho a la ciudad, feminista. Nos da mucho gusto escucharlas a ambas y bueno, bienvenidas. Pues Sophie nos va a dar su presentación en inglés. Adelante.
Merci beaucoup, muchas gracias. Merci pour l'invitation. Sorry, we said English and I'm switching to French. Thanks for the invitation. Really, I appreciate it because it's going to be a packed week for me. But it's very interesting because it's a new piece of research and I'm going to try out a few ideas. It hasn't gelled yet. I just did the first bout of field work in April, May and June in Southern California. So I'm really right now digesting what came out of it. And these are tentative interpretations of what I saw, and I will be emphasizing today particularly the dispositif.
El dispositivo.
Sí, el dispositivo. The workshops that try to have residents understand what it takes to transform their garden into a water-friendly, water conservation type of garden, which is a big thing right now in Southern California. It's been big for 10 years. And we can see policy in action, meaning this is what interests me right now, how we understand climate change, pretty much everybody does now, but the way it gels into people's practices and how they're willing to change is something else altogether, and this is where it kind of sticks usually. So that's one of the ideas behind these workshops, and I'm going to get back to the whole dispositif, right? In a almost a Foucauldian sense, right? Dispositif. Okay, so Saint Augustine. Sure.
J'essaye d'ouvrir aussi mon truc. Sorry. I'm just switching things.
No, there you go. Oh, that's good. I just want to have it here as well, because otherwise I can't really see. And my eyes are not that good anymore. So. Right here. Big.
Il faudrait changer avec la suite.
No, la flèche. Voilà, si, voilà. Okay, perfecto. Okay, so I'm pretty sure you've heard of lawn names or different species that compose what Southern California and North Americans in general understand as lawns. The varieties of grasses, St. Augustine, Bermuda grass, kikuyu, is something that everybody engaging into this conversion is quite familiar with, because there's a lot of natural management issues at stake here. It's not just wanting to change and changing towards, more water friendly landscapes. It's also a very technical thing, and a technical that borders on the natural, which makes it also very difficult. So these are the few exotic names for me: St. Augustine, Bermuda, kikuyu, because these are not grasses I was accustomed to in Europe, and I had to learn a little bit about the botany of Southern California gardens, and it's a lot. Even though you'll see in terms of conversion, it's not that varied. There's a lot of emblematic plants. They are always put forward, and this is also an interesting part of the research, in that you also get to understand the plants, not just the policy and not just the people's will to change, but it's also an interaction with the non-human, and that makes it interesting. Anyway, lawn removal policies in Southern California. This is what this fancy title was about, really. So I've begun interviewing, I've begun participating in workshops. This is all new, all fresh. And I will get back to the workshops later to give you a hint of what is going on in these particular workshops, because it's an interesting, not just the dispositif, but place to try to understand all these different issues and ideas that play out at different scales. So a few definitions first. That will be, okay, let me try. Oh, I can do it. Oh, there you go. One, yes, no, yes. So a few definitions. Lawn removal or turf removal is just one step towards the conversion of gardens in general. So front yard and backyard in the North American suburban type of setting. Towards more drought-resistant vegetal formations. So it's a place, but it's also a composition and a composite landscape that we are talking about here. It is a nature-based solution in itself, and it's supposed to address a lot of problems with regards to climate change. So this garden conversion extends beyond plants and vegetal formation to address water conservation issues. This is goal one, but also other goals that are kind of enfolded into this primary goal, that is biodiversity and addressing the lack thereof. That comes from homogeneous landscapes with only turf, and that's about it. But getting more biodiversity in those gardens, using the garden as what they call a sponge to control water issues in terms of runoff and flooding, and try to keep as much water as possible at the garden level and not just let it run off to the sewers and then into the ocean. And I'm talking about Southern California. The ocean is never that far away, right? So the context is important because we have, in this sense, no, that's the other way around. There you go. There are a lot of public policy implications around this particular topic of lawn removal and garden conversion. And it all comes basically from the Water Conservation Act of 2009 in California that brought awareness to the drought at stake since the early 2000s. And this idea that, you know, there's not going to be enough water and we better start saving water and changing our practices and not just getting new and diverse, you know, sources of water, but also trying to act on the other end of the water cycle, just, you know, try to be more sober in terms of our water consumptions, water consumption patterns. So today still, what is interesting is the Water Conservation Act of California, which is at the state of California level, imposes some conservation measures on water districts that basically buy and sell water. They are not talking to the end user. These water districts, the major ones, at least in Southern California and California in general, will talk to the local distributors that are also called water districts. It's a bit confusing, but they can be also municipal utilities. For instance, the former Long Beach Water and Power that has become Long Beach Utilities is the institution that actually talks to the residents, right? The water district at Southern California level never talks to customers, really. And the residents, of course, are understood as customers as well. So it's a very tricky kind of situation. Whenever you start talking about water in Southern California, people say, "Ooh, it is so political." Okay, there you go. So that's the starting point for the discussion. So today, the lawn watering and the watering of the gardens, which comes from basically Mexican heritage in terms of garden maintenance, right? So lawn watering is presented according to there's different numbers floating, but it's presented as a third to a half of the household bills in terms of water, right? So there's something that, you know, public policy said, oh, okay, if we, you know, use this, we could halve the urban uses in terms of, you know, the water that is used by the residents. This is an estimate, of course. So garden conversion in this sense is understood as a one-size-fits-all nature-based solution that addresses drought, water pollution, urban heat island effects, but also urban biodiversity, et cetera, et cetera. So it is touted basically as a really one-size-fits-all kind of solution. And I will try to follow a little bit of the interesting literature around transitions right now. But just to end with this particular slide, so there's like three possible understandings of all this. Basically, I don't know where my first page is. No, it's that one. No, that's good. I'm good. Sorry. Which is basically, there can be an interpretation based on urban political ecology. Another one that would be the critique of transition management studies that comes from sociologists and geographers as well. And to conclude, I will go with a post-colonial interpretation. It's still a bit tentative, but it's something that really bugs me and I think it's interesting. And so I'll get back to it, but kind of quickly because I haven't really gotten into that yet. So, and from one object, you can unfold different interpretations, which is always, you know, what I like in research. No, that's not it.
Non, mais
So texto, c'est bon? Ah, voilà. Ça, j'ai fait. Ouais, c'est bon. Sorry. So, yeah. There are three ways that a government, if I want to frame it very broadly, and of course it's obviously complicated, but the garden conversion fits into the transformation of practices for residents, and three ways that basically government acts at the domestic level, at the household level. And one is incentives, obviously. So you have subsidies offered by municipalities for garden conversion. If you tear off your lawn, if you tear out your lawn, you are given like a quarter per square foot. And it's not a lot, but it's an incentive as well. And there are programs as well to fund entirely the garden conversion. We will get back to it. It is super expensive. So anyway, so incentives. There's also free plant giveaway, free compost giveaway, you know, everything that goes with the transformation of the garden. The second thing is, the second measure is of course coercion, a rise in water rates if your bill doesn't go down, basically, a fighting of bad water habits. But I have to say, talking to people from Nevada, and in particular in Vegas, it is way less coercive in California than in Vegas. And you can already see that it's very place related, these different measures. And a third type of measure is, of course, education. Talking about the garden and talking about your lawn gives way to talking about biodiversity and nature in general. And so you have free workshops, garden visits, and all these things that absolutely go hand in hand with incentives and coercion. And this I took from Dowling and Bulkley. Bulkley, who's a very prominent urban political, she's into not exactly urban political ecology, but she's a geographer interested in carbon conduct, and Dowling as well. And they did a study in Australia about carbon conduct, and they took out these three types of measures. And I think it's super clear, very helpful to understand what's going on and what are the levers that the government is using to try to force transformation. Okay, so that's the context. Method. Method is something else altogether. I will focus in the results I will talk about today, mostly on observations that I did in these workshops funded or organized by the big water districts in Southern California. There's 2 of them or 3 of them, not much more. And they connect, like I was saying, with municipalities that work as the providers and the distributors at local level, or with smaller water districts who act as distributors at local level. And there's so many of them in Southern California. I should have brought up a map here, but I'm sorry, I'm a geographer, should have brought up a map. But I don't have a map, so you have to trust me on that one. But you can look into it. So Metro Water District is one of the biggest in Southern California, and Metro Water District contracted out to a private landscape architecture firm called G3 Group. And G3 Group is the one doing, managing the workshops and moderating the workshops for them, okay? And G3 partners with CBOs and or municipalities and or sub-water districts that can top up the incentives brought to the table by Metro Water through the state of California. And that means that G3 Group has a wide variety of places where they can do the educational measures. And there's a wide variety between the city of Long Beach to Rancho Santa Margarita, which maybe you've never heard of it, but it's in the wealthy part of Orange County, right? Southeast of Los Angeles. To the city of Compton, which is right next to Long Beach, very poor, formerly, historically a Black neighborhood that is now Latino, majority Latino. So a whole variety of neighborhoods in terms of socioeconomic characteristics, racial characteristics, obviously, but also in terms of landscapes and the place of gardens in the local urban structures, right? So that makes a difference, because we touch here on a garden. It's not a a toilet, for instance, because you have a lot of programs that are targeting, you know, the upgrade of toilets to have more water conserving toilets, for instance. But this is not a toilet, this is a garden, so it goes with something else, right? So top-up initiatives, a variety of neighborhoods, and some workshops that last something like 3 to 4 hours, each of them, on a specific topic. It can be get rid of your lawn, you know, a very sexy way of phrasing it. Get rid of your lawn. Learn to work with California native plants in your garden. Try to build your soil as a sponge. So that this is the header. And then for 3 or 4 hours, you have the same routine protocol in place. A welcome coffee with pastries. Okay, welcome, and please have a banana, and please, we have a compost heap, so please put the banana peel in the box here, so we can recycle it. So the education goes from the very welcoming bit of the workshop. You have goodies as well, gardening tools that are stamped with the Water District logo, for instance. I got tons of gardening shears from attending 12 workshops over the course of 3 months. So I was just handing them out in the neighborhood afterwards. So that was interesting. But it's gardening tools. It can be seed packets of California native plants or vegetables that people grow in traditionally California gardens, etc., etc. So that's the goodies. Then the lecture itself lasts an hour and a half and 2 hours, and it really is a lecture in a very formal setting with someone professing and with a PowerPoint that is full of pictures to show you differences between the root systems of that type of grass versus the root system of this type of grass, etc., etc. Sometimes, and this is the picture that I put here, there are hands-on moments. This one was the instructor in the middle, that was shot in Compton. The 2 ladies were participating, a member of a local CBO that was associated with the workshop. And the instructor from a G3 group is in the middle, and she was showing how to sprout potatoes from half-cut potatoes that are gone a little funky in your potato storage bin of some sort. And so she was like, you know, showing how to do it and what to do. I'm not going to say what the ladies thought about it. We'll get to that later. Because what's interesting, what's interesting, of course, is what happens after the workshops as much as what happens in the workshop. So the third moment is the plant raffle. There's always a nice and festive moment around, there's a raffle. So basically you enter your name or you get a ticket at the beginning, and there's a lottery raffle where you win California native plants. So I also won a lot of plants because everybody wins basically. I also won a lot of plants that I handed out afterwards, and that people were happy. And it's always some very emblematic plants as well. I'm not going to get into so much detail about it, but there's a couple of plants that are really the star plants of these types of initiatives. Moment number 4 is a discussion, and sometimes a discussion with questions. You know, the participants are allowed to ask a lot of questions afterwards, after the presentation. And sometimes there's the visit of a demonstration garden. Depends where the workshop is taking place, because sometimes they take place in a community neighborhood center and there's nothing, there's just parking lots around it and maybe a restaurant or something. But sometimes, if it's at Long Beach Utilities, for instance, they have a demonstration garden that they built so that the customers would get what it is to plant, you know, a California native garden. So the workshop ends with a visit and people start talking about, oh, I have that one in my garden. And so there's a lot of interesting conversations there as well. And then you get to ask some real questions, not just questions on paper in a PowerPoint, but, you know, this plant and mine is a bit similar, but I'm having issues with, and then people start talking. Because what is interesting is what happens after the lecture, really. When the instructor is not here anymore, and it's the water distributor that ends the visit or ends the discussion. The instructor, you know, does the job, and after an hour and a half, they just leave because they're on a schedule, right? So what happens afterwards is people start talking. to each other. And I was talking with them. I was just observing, and I said, you know, I wasn't hiding the fact that it was work for me. But I just said, you know, I'm staying with this university and I'm observing and I'm doing research, but I'm super interested in plants. And then people forget and they start, you know, talking about, you know, I have this issue and well, what the lady said, the instructor said, I didn't like it because, you know, blah, blah, blah. So what happens also is when the instructor goes, people start criticizing the format and what is said, and start questioning the science also of the workshop. So that's super interesting. They also give tips. They start networking. Give me your card, and then I can call you. Oh, you've done that. I want to do that, but I'm not sure. It looks difficult. Please come visit and let's exchange ideas and tips and where to find compost and where to find this for free, etc., etc. All right. So, like I'm saying here on the slide, kind of an observation position, but a little active as well because I like plants. So I started talking about plants as well with the participants, and of course, it would be super interesting to continue talking to these people. I haven't done it yet because it's still a little fresh, but it would be, of course, interesting to keep the conversation going privately with some of the participants who would be willing to share also what they've been doing since the workshops and how they're coping with the difficulty of it, because it's super difficult to convert your garden. I'm going to get to it. Okay, so like I was saying, one of the first framework to analyze this particular thing, the lawn conversion into water, you know, friendly gardens. I looked into obviously urban political ecology. That was the #1 go-to type of theory that you can use to understand all that. And I have to say it works pretty well. It works pretty well. So I just put here this this quote, this classic paper from Zwinglo and Heinen. And it works pretty well because obviously lawns are not just lawns, but they're also part and parcel of a particular form of the production of space. And this is what I was meaning by, you know, it is not an air conditioner. It is not a toilet. It is something that is also part of a broader ensemble, which is the fabric of the neighborhood and the fabric of the city. It means a very different thing to build a water-friendly garden in Paris, where it's mostly rain gardens meant to avoid flooding in the outskirts of Paris, and in Southern California, where it's water-saving gardens. And it's even different in Arizona, where it's already a desert gardening type of habit. But there's also a lot of water conservation things next to it that are pretty new, which is getting the water from your roof and gathering water from the roof in order to water your garden. So different means of articulating the urban fabric and the technology around water saving and water uses. Second, the lawn is a dominant vegetal formation in the private garden, I will say in the United States in general, and it is kind of an import from the Midwest, basically, and the Eastern Seaboard, because the Californian garden was not a lawn dominated garden prior to suburbanization, I would say, and the arrival of Midwesterners probably, but I need to look into that historically. I think it could be also an interesting avenue. Anyway, what is interesting is the garden, the private garden, is not really regulated. I mean, the state does not really try to do things with people's gardens. You're pretty much free of what you're doing. I'm not saying the parkway, which is the front yard. This is highly regulated by norms and neighborhood standards, but I'm talking about the backyard. The backyard pretty much can do anything. You can run around naked if you want. Nobody's going to object to it. And you can plant whatever you want. It's going to be easy, right? Invasives aside, but I would say if you put it in the backyard, there's a good chance that nobody will know about it. So there's this idea that if you touch upon the private garden, you also have, because it's a big chunk of space in suburban type of setting, if you touch upon the private garden, it is going to be significant spatially in terms of a transformation, right? In terms of landscape transformations. And what is important is in the front yard, the piece of the garden that is consists in the front yard is very much attached to particular neighborhood norms with regards order, cleanliness, and maintenance. If you don't mow the lawn in front of your house, the neighbors are gonna knock on your door and say, hey, you know, that looks kind of crappy. In particular, if you live in a residential area that is ruled by HOAs, homeowners associations, such as in gated communities, private developments, that kind of stuff, right? And there's rules and regulations. You cannot plant whatever you want in the front yard in these areas. But even in classic urban neighborhoods, you know, you're supposed to blend in, right? Your parkway is supposed to blend in. This is important. We'll see about this. It came out a lot in the discussions in the workshops. So with this urban political ecology interpretation, it's obviously a nod to Paul Robbins, who pretty much thought about the lawn as one of those, interesting objects to understand articulate a lot of different sources of power in the city. And he did this paper, and then he did a book about this called Lawn People, I think the year after that. And then he brought about the first handbook on urban political ecology, so to speak. So there's really a continuity here. And he would understand with Julie Sharp, who co-authored this particular paper, he understood lawn as a complex ecological / petrochemical industry. Representative of the entanglements that Zwingerdo and Heinen are talking in this very short quote. But I'm going to be a little provocative here now. Okay, so that works. We understand, the lawn, how it's an important thing that sort of, represents a whole different things. But so taking out the lawn could be a good thing, probably. If we try to go one step further. So that lawn was not Californian, indigenous, blah, blah, blah. It was a lot of maintenance. It's a lot of chemicals in order to feed the lawn and nurture it, et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot of management. It's a whole industry around it to mow it, composed of cheap labor, mostly migrants. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can connect to this very small and seemingly inoffensive landscape form. So taking it out would be good, right? It would be a good step towards a more, sustainable landscape. Thank you. Perhaps from a strictly environmental point of view, and I could discuss this with ecologists. I'm not sure what they would say about it, but not from an economic point of view, probably. Because what happens is, there you go. So, because the way Zwingerdo and Heinen would have it, it would appear just another shift over time of this complex configuration at play in the production of this particular form of urban environment that is the suburban structure, right? With the single detached home with the garden around it. So it's just a shift, and converting your garden means being entangled in another form of another complex, and I will very quickly get into that. Lawn removal and garden conversion are becoming a big business in Southern California. One is that conversion could at first be understood as a threat to labor, and in particular low-paying manual labor, the people who maintain the lawns. But maintaining a California-only, a Californian native garden is time intensive as well. I mean, people say, It is sold as low maintenance, it is not. And most of the testimonies in the workshops are, okay, yeah, that's a lot of work. You need to trim, you need to mulch twice a year. So there is also a new industry building around it with certifications. You need to be approved a water conservation specialist in order to, install a more efficient irrigation system. One, because if you convert your garden, it's not going to be self-sustaining like this on the first year. Your trees in particular and shrubs, they need to root down. So it takes a few years before you can actually get rid of irrigation. And two, trimming these plants, especially native Californian plants, is not easy. And it can be counterintuitive in terms of when you trim it and how you trim it. So gardeners and gardening firms are slowly building some norms, professional norms in terms of, okay, now I will be certified, board certified in a way, in order to be recognized as, okay, I'm comfortable with that type of garden. And of course, there's not a lot of them, so they're in high demand. So it's another chunk of the market for gardening. And two, it costs a lot of money to get rid of your lawn because once you take it out, you have to dump it somewhere, the lawn, right? It's super heavy and it's massive. We're talking rolls of lawn, like 10,000 carpets that you have to get rid of. And so it's not an easy thing. And transforming the garden afterwards, there's an estimate by G3. They sort of estimate the cost for a standard sized Southern California garden between $10,000 and $20,000, right, to transform the garden. And there's no guarantee that the plants are going to last and survive, right, due to the fact that they're very sensitive in a way to their environment. Anyway, so it's a big investment. You have to adapt your irrigation system. You have to invest in a new set of plants. You have to landscape in order to catch the rainwater, build what is called swales in order to catch as much of the rainwater as you can during the winter and the spring, when there's, autumn and the winter when there's most of the Southern California rain, etc., etc. So there's the shift in terms of the economics sector with competing professional certifications as well. There's several of them floating around, and it's not very clear, who gets to be the most, recognized one. And as you can see, it's not just landscaping firms or gardening firms. It's also plant nurseries. It's also seed banks. So there's a whole economic environment that goes around it. Some of it is nonprofit, like seed banks. Some of them were, forward thinking back in the 1950s and 60s, conserving native seeds. Others are not. Others are for profit, obviously, which is part of the whole chunk of the market, and they are developing and consolidating into another type of economic sector in terms of gardening. Should you delegate the work, like I was saying, it'll cost you between $10,000 to $20,000. And if you want to do it yourself, it is a lot of work. Planning, getting rid of the lawn, planting, installing your new drip systems, and a lot of time, most of the time, working households, they don't have the time to do that. It's retirees, but then, when you're a retiree, it's a lot of work as well. And sometimes you can't do it. So we already can see three problems in terms of what was alluded to as the highly uneven and deeply unjust urban landscapes that come out of this. One, garden conversion might not even be an issue in more affluent neighborhoods. I heard during the workshops, especially in Compton, the ladies were saying, "Oh, they don't have the problem in Beverly Hills, honey." Like, okay. And then explain to me, well, they don't care about water prices and they don't care about the water bill. And so there's no coercion. They're going to, flood the place anyway. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about them. I said, I'm not. So anyway, water costs or lawn maintenance is not an issue in affluent neighborhoods like Beverly Hills, like the ladies in Compton are well aware of. Two, if you choose a garden conversion, it's not going to be an issue either in more affluent households where you can afford to delegate the work, right? To hire a contractor to do it. And this is something you can see in recently gentrified neighborhoods. The conversion is super visible there. This is where it spreads since, I would say 2015, it's been spreading like wildfire, taking advantage of the incentives and the opportunities, right? And number three, garden conversion incentives, they are conceived solely for property owners, right? Who occupy the land. It excludes a lot of less affluent residents who live in apartment buildings or in dense multifamily housing types of accommodations. And this is really a big issue because since it's tied to water distribution, it is tied to a water bill. And if it's tied to a water bill, it is tied to land ownership and property, right? And property rights. So, okay, so that works in a way. But I would like to get to a second type of interpretation, which I really like. I mean, this a second theoretical thread that I think is really super interesting and probably more efficient in terms of understanding the trickle down effect, from policy to the households. So garden conversion is part of a broader trend of measures that are implemented, in fact, from the top down to engage in climate change related transitions, socio-ecological transitions. And so we can envision this incentive coercion education trio, which is at the core of garden conversion, as a form of government of conduct. And this is directly taken, like I was saying, from Elizabeth Shove and Walker, who's an environmental geographer. And Elizabeth Shove is a sociologist of the technical, basically. And they're talking about mostly energy transition here, but it's also interesting to think around these ideas. Is it possible to intervene and deliberately shift technologies, practices, and social arrangements? They're talking about air conditioning units, right? And they're kind of disputing the fact that one generation is going to come after the next, which is basically what is talked about in transition management studies that don't really particularly care for social science interpretations of what is technological change and how there's a layering of technologies. Always, it's not one replacing the others. There's always this layering. And it works a little bit like that for the garden as well. We'll see that there's a layering of species, a layering of practices, and some sort of, people, they sort of bend the rules a little, which is always interesting. So I will use here directly some of the observations and material from the educational workshops. You have to tell me when I have to stop, okay? Because I can go on forever. Okay, perfect. Okay, so basically, participants, they feel huge moral pressure. And this is what comes out after the workshop. There's a lot of anxiety about, okay, am I going to be allowed to keep this or that? Or I would like to do this, but on the other hand, I'd rather do that because I'm more comfortable with that than this. And so moral issues and dilemmas in general that they express very clearly during the workshops, after the workshops in particular. One of these quotes here, will they make me tear down my pomegranate tree? Of course, fruit trees, part of the classic Californian garden. There's the fruit tree, there's the lemon tree, there's the lime, there's pomegranate tree and whatnot, and avocado trees. They are water intensive. I mean, they use a lot of water, right? If you want fruit, you need water. So it's always brought in the discussion, do I have to take it to tear my pomegranate tree, right? Or my lemon tree? Because I want the lemons. I want to enjoy my garden in that way as a productive garden. Secondly, there's the pressure is felt And this is where it interconnects. People have this broader knowledge of climate change, but it connects at the neighborhood level, which is, I think, interesting. Because, and this is this quote, I walk around in the neighborhood, this is a participant. If I see a good idea, it inspires me. So there's this imitation game going from one garden to the other. And this is what, okay, I'm going to go back. Yeah. This workshop in particular, you can see organized for the parkways for the parkway in Long Beach. And I got to dig holes and plant stuff, which was great. But they install these little signs here. Native plants live here. It is not for the owner that they plant it. It is for the neighbors. When they walk around, they can see it and then they can ask questions about it and perhaps, you know, get involved into the same kind of transformation themselves. It is kind of like the 1950s when you came home and you said to your dad, Dad, the neighbor bought a new car. Can't we buy a new car, right? And it's been shown in electric vehicle, people buying electric vehicle. There's a lot of that at play, you know, the neighborhood effect and not just the networks, but also the neighborhood effect, which is really place related, yeah, place-based. Thank you. So there's a lot of pressure at neighborhood scale, and the resistance to this new model is also understood at neighborhoods, can also be understood at neighborhood scale. This is the final quote here. The instructor goes, let's talk about the HOAs. Isn't it a problem, folks? And then the whole participants in the workshop, they just laugh like crazy. Because in the Rancho Santa Margarita, all of them have to deal with the HOAs, who most of them specifically forbid the use of desert plants and xeriscaping in the parkway, because there are rules that say you need to have lawn, right? So how to get around this? Water district officers, they need to be advocating for California native gardens with the HOAs. So they have meetings with them, they try to convince them that it's the next step in the future and that they need to go that way. But it's not easy, apparently. And they have to do it one HOA by one HOA, which is time consuming, obviously. All right. So we saw some of the structural differentiation, but Chauvin-Walker's question also raises the issue of the agency of residents themselves in their understanding and adapting of the new norm of the no-lawn garden. So since the message brought about by the municipalities is not necessarily consistent with other messages, such as food security, for instance, or, you know, residents are in a position to bend the rules a little and adapt them to their own uses. For instance, we have mixed messages here. There you go. The picture on the right, you have artificial turf on the right, heavy paving as well, with drainage that goes straight to the sewer. But the parkway is mulch with what looks like agaves from here. I'm not sure. Yeah, it looks like agaves. So obviously a little, you know, composition that is at the same time artificial, but also resistant and water conservation, kind of water conservation friendly. And you get the whole variety of it. Creative and resistant in Highland Park to the left with San Pedro or Peruvian apple, I'm not sure. But also aloes as well, and nopales at the back. With a little cemented, you know, Mexican with a sombrero in the front and some stones. Okay, that's creative. Another one is artificial and water friendly and floral as well. You have geranium and nopales, but also gravel and artificial turf in the middle. So it's kind of a pretty complex composition. And at the bottom, you have the, you know, sin complicaciones type of garden, which is basically cemented over, but there's still a little bit of, you know, gravel next to the walls so that it can absorb a little bit of the runoff from the roof, right? It does not go straight to the sewer, it can be absorbed a little, but there's not that many plants here except at the very edge of the house. Maybe you can't really see it here, but it's an interesting composition, okay? So what that means is at garden level, all conversions give way to forms of hybridization of the norms in an area that is mostly unregulated, but still connects our broad understanding of climate change to our personal experience of the urban environment, right? And I need to build a typology of all that, but I haven't gone to it yet. So they arbitrate. The residents arbitrate all the time. Forbidden plants, forbidden landscapes within the garden, sometimes hidden, sometimes, you can see them. Even the instructors, oh, you can keep a bit of lawn, it's okay. You don't have to take it out. I know I have to answer to my kid too. Or I have a dog, I need the lawn, right? Or the pomegranates, again, here, a very nice example of a hedge built out of pomegranate trees. All right. And I'm going to end with this final interpretation, and it's going to take me like 2-3 minutes, if that's okay. That's this third possible direction that seems promising, but it's not ripe yet, if I want to use a botanical metaphor. The native plant police is in on you. This is how I called it. There is a lot of discussions around, what plant is allowed and what plant is not allowed, not just in terms of conservation of water, from a conservation of water standpoint, but also from a native, non-native standpoint. And I think it's super interesting because there's a lot of controversies with ecologists about this. And I would refer you guys to Christian Kuhl, the geographer from Switzerland who works on invasives in Madagascar. And he works with ecologists, and the science is still uncertain about, are native plants better adapted to the local conditions? There's more of a thinking around, of course, climate zones and a translation of certain plants to others, but there's always the risk of invasives. For instance, Australian wattle, which is an acacia tree, and transplanted to South Africa, sort of engulfed the Table Mountain National Park in South Africa. So, and plant circulation has been going on forever. So where do we limit ourselves in terms of the composition of the garden that we want to have, right? And in particular, there's a finger pointing during the workshops. There's finger pointing of alien lawns, what is called alien lawns, the Kikuyus, summer lawns in particular coming from the Caribbean. The Kikuyus, the St. Augustine, the Bermuda lawns that are used on golf courses as well. And there's a form of orthodoxy of certain organizations, such as the California Native Plant Society, for which there is no future outside of native plants, right? And it's more flexible for others. A lot of instructors in the workshops, they say, if it's climate appropriate, who cares? You can have, and you can keep your grandpa's roses if you want. So at the end, with all these compromises, with these accommodations to this or that, what is the ultimate goal in terms of water conservation? It goes beyond that. And one of the water officers in Southern Orange County told me, and I asked the question, but we're kind of losing the point here. If we allow for this or that, so what's the institution standpoint of that? She said, it's okay. All we want is diversity in the gardens. So it boils down to that eventually. But I think this question is important. Where do we live? Do we stop? This is what I put in the final slide. Where do we stop the time and where and the place, right? In terms of the selection of plants. For instance, the California garden, the traditional, Mexican Californian garden. Do we still keep that? Because it's very water intensive, the fruit trees and the roses, et cetera, but it is part, and people are very attached to it. So what do we do with that? And this is a typical front garden where you can see there's a whole big mix of stuff. You have the emblematic plants like the Amapola de California. But you also have, you know, an old rose bush, which was probably there way before the Amapolas were installed. And so how do we think about all that? I think it's interesting. Also, I put a reference here to a South African case with, because obviously I did a lot of things on South Africa, and there's a lot of echoes for me with this particular situation. There was a controversy in the Table Mountain National Park, which is run by ecologists, by the way, who just go, you know, we have to go all native. So let's tear down all the pine trees that were planted in the 19th century, right? Except they got a riot on their hands because people were so attached to the trees, especially people from the poor neighborhoods of Cape Town. They gather in the mountain of the trees for giant picnics. And so there was a mobilization. Nobody had seen something like that in Cape Town around, you know, the trees. People were chaining themselves to trees, et cetera. So what is our understanding of, you know, our landscapes and where we should go with them? And I think this post-colonial, what we do with this interpretation is also an avenue for, and will give me food for thought for sure. And that's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sophie. So before we open up for a question, I will give the floor to Adriana for the comment.
Okay. I'm going to try to do it in English, but if I get insecure, I'm going to speak in Spanish. Okay. So I am very impressed about this topic. Honestly, it's something that is kind of new, but also it's something that I already know in some kind of lectures and things that I've seen before. And one thing that I really like is that I think that the lawn was like a very good object of study, but also one very good, I'm going to say like vehicle to speak about a lot of stuff, just like you said before, just like you said when we were here. First, of course, there's this thing about the production space, no? That we know that you just said like lawn is not just lawn. I'm gonna add like lawn is neutral, right? Because we see a lot of things conviviendo in there.
Right, next, attached to it.
Yes. So first, I really like this discussion about production of space, but I also understand that there's a lot of tension between the private and public space. So that's a very good important thing about this topic. Also, this thing about the shortage of water, because I know that it's a main problem in South California, and it's also very interesting because I came from one state that has the same problems. Also, I want to destacar, highlight, of course, this interaction between urban governance, between local authorities and local powers, but also how the residents and the habitants of the neighborhoods react, how they interact together. I think that this also one discussion that is very interesting that is about the I don't know if it's correct, but the homogenization of the space, and in this case the green space. We need to I don't know, it kind of seems that we need to have one kind of green space, but I don't know, it's something that I kind of understand. And also this interacts with the discussion of the authentic and the native. No, that's something that for me it's very interesting. And also, of course, the thing about the landscape transformation, and also I don't know if I can say the aesthetic of the space. So I think that it's very good that just one word, or in this case, just one thing, kind of nature, mobilize all this kind of stuff. Also, I think when you talk about this difficult in substitute the loan and all the different problems that it came with that, like I don't know, the high cost and also the big investment, not only economically, but also in time, right? Because that's a very important resource. And I think it's very interesting how we can see this this form of work from the government that has, for one side, these incentives that you talk about, also the different kind of coercions, but also this space that I think that they have a big apuesta, they have a big stake, yes,
yeah.
that it's in the part of education. No? And I think that's something very interesting, and also I think it's very enrichment when you speak about what happened in the workshop, but also what happened when that ends, no? When it creates another kind of space. Or
Sure.
I'm very curious about this interpretation that it comes from the post-colonial view, because honestly, I'm not very familiar with that, but I think it makes a very good discussion between the past, the present, and the future when we speak about the environment, but also about the landscape. It's very funny when you speak about some kind of police or some kind of vigilance of native plants, because I think that's what you mean when you speak about the dispositive, right? It's kind of that crazy thing that it's tough to create a very good thing for the environment and to save more water, but it also has this lado punitivo. I don't know.
Punitive side.
Yes. So when you were finished your conversation, I actually was wondering how well, first I had this question before you began to talk, that was why this garden conservation is the main solution that the local government identified to make front to the sequía,
drought.
to the drought. Yes. Why this particular measure and not another one? And also I was wondering how not to lose from the center, as you said before, the importance or the center of the policy, that it's the water conservation, because it seems like the discussion is going from another branch.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. Even when you were talking about this post-colonial approach, I was thinking, without being an expert or knowing anything about this, how in different contexts they are apostando. They are
That betting knows have a stake on.
they are
Insisting on.
change different practice of the environment. Now I was thinking into the wine industry, no, that it used to have this particularly way of have the no, it was like very clean without
Pesticides.
It has that, and also without no native species. And now I think at least in Mexico the wine industry is changing to have a lot of varieties in the terroir, even if they are invasive. No, I don't know how to say
External?
Not
External,
indigenous?
not original plants from there, no, and it's been seen that is something very important to have more richness in the earth and whatever. No? So I just was thinking in that example to ask myself how this kind of homogenization of the nature of the space in the different neighborhoods could I don't know if be un retroceso. I don't know And
Going back.
yes, going back to something that maybe, of course, I know that the fruit trees and the grass has a lot of needs a lot of water in a very intensive way. That's also a problem here in Mexico. But I don't know how we can convivir between these things. No, we need to have this kind of sponge to save more water, but it also needs a lot of time to make them work, and they need a lot of resources, and I don't know. That's something that I'm wondering about. And speaking specifically about the methodology, I was I was wondering first how you told us before about your approach to the workshops. How do you get there, and that you speak with the people saying that where you come from and what are your interests. So I just want to know if you can speak more about the access that you have from to get to these workshops, because I know that you said that they last like 3-4 hours, and also you get the other conversation that happened after the workshop. So I don't know how do you systematize? How do you systematize that kind of information? I know that it must be a lot. And also I want to ask you which are the complexities, but also the advantage of get that kind of information for those workshops that were organized by the people that provide the service, no? Los distribuidores locales.
The G3 group?
Yes, that. And yeah, that's all my questions. I'm very happy to hear you, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adriana, for this close reading and listening in to what I was saying. Do you want me to get straight into the questions? I wanted to ask you what your topic is for your dissertation.
Okay.
Can you just briefly explain it to me?
Yes. Right now I work. Where I work. I work as stories of life. Life stories from a woman here in Mexico that has a productive project in the suelo de conservación. I don't know how to say suelo.
Conservation.
Yes. Yeah, they have some kind of migration and movement between the city and the rural spaces.
Okay, good. So also with productive gardens and gardening, yeah, which is a big, yeah, it's one of the questions that you raise really goes into that. So I'm going to do them one after the other. Why is it the main solution? It is not the only solution. It is perhaps the most spectacularly visible one at city scale, because you try to transform the landscapes. But there's a lot of other solutions that are way easier to develop. One is a technical shift in terms of toilets, washing machines, all the things at household level that consume water. There's a lot of incentives to replace your old washing machine or replace your old toilets, because the Californian toilet used to have 10 gallons of water for one flush. So to shift to a 2-gallon type of toilet, there's a heavy incentivization around that. To fix also your plumbing systems, to try to isolate and fix the leaks to the whole system in general is also super important, because a lot of waste water in terms of water comes from the leaks in the system itself, not at the end user level. So the garden is one of them, but when they interpret the household bills and they see that there's so much water invested in the garden, when the garden a lot of the times is not used for anything, it's just a piece of lawn that is just there. People don't really use it, it's just ornamental. They don't, even if they say I have a dog, I have killed kids, not that much really. So it is understood as a waste of water and as one of the pressure points where, that type of pressure you could apply in order to lower the bills and thus the consumption of water at household level. But it's not the only one. But it is probably the most visible one in terms of transformational landscapes.
Great.
So, and I like gardens. I don't like toilets is not really my thing. So, so I'd rather work on gardens than toilets. But to the point, fair enough. It is not, it's one of the solutions, right? Even though we know also that in Southern California, most of the water use is related to agriculture, especially in the Salton Sea, Imperial Valley and Salton Sea area. Hence the Colorado River being depleted when it crosses the border and all that. But with the urban pressure in terms of, the urban growth exerts a lot of pressure on these water reserves as well. So, and what is interesting is ever since the 1950s, water conservation has been ongoing. It is not new. There's twice as many people in Southern California, and the consumption of water is pretty much the same as it was in 1950. So we have seen already a lot of progress in that sense, and I'm speaking from the water district, obviously, point of view. Also because for public space, and you were talking about public-private, you were mentioning this. Public space now is systematically irrigated with recycled water. Same with golf courses. Golf courses, interestingly enough, were the very first amenity that converted to ecological practices, meaning we are going to use recycled water. We know we're under fire of the critique in terms of you're not sustainable enough and let's get rid of let's get rid of golf courses. And we Southern Californians are getting rid of golf courses, but not because of the water issue or sustainability issue, because the generation after the baby boomers, they don't play golfing. So that's the big problem in terms of maintaining the standard, because it's a very, maintaining the landscape of the golf course is super expensive. So you need to have a lot of members to your golf course, and this is declining. And now we're seeing these golf courses open up for land development, obviously, residential development. There's one in San Clemente that's being converted right now. And interestingly enough, other more original things like surf farms, even in the desert.
Surf farms?
Surf farms. What is called surf farm of surf ranches. Artificial pools with artificial waves.
Wow.
Well, yes, for surfing.
It's like Six Flags.
Yeah. That's for surfing.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah,
That's
so,
crazy.
yeah. So, yeah, and is it really about water conservation? Well, that's what comes out of this mess of people, adapting the rules and bending the rules a little. You lose the sight of the water conservation. And at some point you're discussing with the providers and they say, we can be accommodating, we can bend here a little, and bend here a little, and at the end you're like, but wait, what is the point? Exactly? What are we doing here? And I think it is perhaps one of the good examples, because it's a garden. Because it touches upon the garden, that means that it's not going to be fixed for it will not address one issue. It will address a great variety of issues, but it is not going to be confined to one issue either. And you can see it also on the other side with the conflicts that can also happen in the garden between different public policies. One of them in particular in Southern California and California in general, now there's in the planning code, of the master planning at municipal level, you are supposed to have an item around food security and food justice, right? Access to fresh food and fresh fruit and veg, due to the fact that a lot of neighborhoods were deprived of fresh food and could only get their food from petrol stations and that kind of stuff, where you only get chips and, salsa, which is super industrial anyway, and that's it. So, and junk food in general. So the food deserts, fighting food deserts means promoting productive gardens in the private area of the garden. And if you live in an apartment building, have raised beds to grow a couple of herbs and vegetables. It's better than nothing. We should do that. And it's in the planning code for master planning for municipalities. They need to address this issue. So you can understand that it can clash at some point with a water conservation measure. And then you also have superimposed on that, because it's in the poorest neighborhoods, a productive garden measure. So what is the arbitration there? I'm not sure. But you can see that it's definitely not just about water conservation, but it's also biodiversity. It's also trying to build some sort of green network of private gardens and public realms that have been converted, et cetera, et cetera. Homogenization is a way of going back. Yes, I'm not sure what to make of it, but it's also very strong in terms of, and it also dovetails into another thing. Gardens have historical life in terms of, it's not something that you can change instantly. It takes time to understand your garden. I would say about 5 years to try to actually figure out, this is the place where I can grow this. This will work, this will not work, etc. And it's not automatic. It's not like you're installing, I don't know, I don't even know what to say at this point, but meaning
furniture or something like
yeah, exactly. It's not furniture. It can be understood as furniture if you're only thinking about, the garden as ornamental, something that you're not touching in any way and that will not impact your life and senses, etc. But it's also it can die out on you pretty easily, especially with these gardens that still need some skills. They really do. Manzanitas, super fragile when they're taken out of the natural habitats, and it's kind of a pride, poster child for water conservation and native Californian plant gardens. It's the manzanita, which is like the poster child. And there are people who are collecting them, and they grow very slowly, and they are very sensitive to water issues, but soil and et cetera, et cetera. So embracing, the water, you have the soil, you have the plants, and you have the uses. And so it's kind of this entanglement that I'm interested in. As to the methodology, and it's interesting what you're saying about the wine industry. I have to think about it because there's also a lot of wine growing farmers in Arizona, interestingly enough, and they have to adapt right now to climate change. So it could be an interesting avenue to go, because I know that there's been a tremendous growth of the wine industry in Texas, for instance, due to climate change. I mean, it's been ongoing for the past 10 years. So it could be interesting to look into what's going on in Arizona and have a little wine on the side, which doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
It doesn't hurt.
And nice way of doing field work.
Yeah, exactly. And I will end with the methodology bit and the question you were raising, how to systematize. I could show you my notebooks. What I do usually, because it is public, it is advertised at municipal level. There's a public workshop, anybody can come. So usually it's not just residents from that particular municipality that come, it's people from all over. And it is public, it is publicly advertised. I just talked to the people at G3 and I said, I'm here for a while, I'm going to be attending a lot of workshops, this is fine. I said, I'm going to interview you as well on the side, but I would like to attend as a, participant on this. And this is fine. And we sort of traded. And I said, maybe I will be in a position to hear a few things interesting, anonymized, obviously, but to give you some feedback about your own workshop. And they had it identified, obviously, pretty much everything that I brought on the table. There's nothing that I'm inventing there out of the blue, and I'm not, I'm not operating some form of revelation for them. They are perfectly aware of the limitations, but they are also operating within a field of constraints, the time and the money. They would like to do more hands-on things because a formal lecture, nobody's satisfied with that. Everybody hates it, basically, and they say, yeah, I haven't learned anything. This is something I've read on the internet already, and I hate Zoom workshops. Can you imagine gardening on Zoom? What's the point? So, which makes this, I'm sorry, we're done with the presentation, but the first photograph for the seminar with the Parkway experiment in Long Beach, that makes it very precious. There's not that many municipalities or local water district that will put this kind of workshop, hands-on workshop in place. And it's to the credit of the Long Beach municipality, really, to have developed that kind of stuff. Because there's a lack of not just money resources to do it, but manpower. And a lot of municipalities in Southern California, they don't even act as the relay for 3G groups. They could have a 3G group workshop for free. They don't do it because usually there's one it's not a conservation officer, it's a sustainability officer in a municipality. And he or she might be into, I don't know, energy or trash collection, not water conservation. And this is directly tied into water conservation. So the silo approach in terms of the technical services within a municipality is kind of a problem to articulate this very broad garden policy, to think out of the box and not just in terms of water conservation. So it's kind of two ways. It's one way, it's not just water conservation, but the other is, yes, but the people who implement it, they are limited because they are in water conservation. And I still need to map out, all the different municipalities in Southern California and what actually how they relate this, because it's also important. The outreach programs they have in place varies radically from one municipality to the other. And even the ultimate purpose of water conservation, due to the flexibility of the garden and what it means and how it can be twisted and turned into another kind of policy. Huntington Beach, for instance, super conservative municipality, to say the least. They care a lot about the garden program and the lawn conversion program. They top up the incentives from the state of California, which is interesting. Huntington Beach does not have a particularly ecological fiber, politically. But what is important to them is the economic strategy of the city, which is surf and surfing, right? For the 2028 Olympics, as surf city, as city branding. So what happens is they promote get rid of your lawn and plant a native Californian garden because it will help cut the runoffs, because the runoffs go straight to the ocean, pollute the ocean waters. Hence, the surf strategy just sort of tanks because the water is unfit for surfing. So you can see the whole system, the cycle of the water, right? And the place of the garden in that. And this is basically what is promoted. It's not just saving water, it's using the water as a link in the chain, in the whole cycle of water. So, but you can see how it talks to municipalities in very different ways as well. And I mean, good for Huntington Beach. They implement other ways to think about your garden, but it certainly isn't about water conservation at all, right? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hay preguntas, comentarios.
Thank you, Sophie, for your presentation. It's very appealing how, as you mentioned, and also Adriana, that the gardens become the at the center of conflicting policies, of conflicting perspectives of what to do in terms of water conservation, but the sustainability as a whole. And well, your presentation made me think about how this could be read as a dystopic science fiction novel, no?
Yes.
Like a dictatorship of the experts on how to use the gardens and imposing on the residents what's the best way in terms of climate change adaptation of the plants, the native plants, the discussion on climate appropriate native plants. But if we think in this perspective of dystopic literature, then it will be the conflict with how we have an attachment to the territory or to the landscape. So in this post-colonial interpretation that you were mentioning, perhaps another point of conflict will be if the type of gardens, private gardens in South California could be considered like a patrimonial cultural heritage. So there's another point of conflict between what is appropriate in terms of climate change with their living in the space and how we adapt the territory. And this brings me to the literature, academic literature on socio-technical controversies, because there is a different and conflicting appropriation of an expert knowledge, and there is not a correct and unique answer to what to do with gardens. And well, this translates into policies on whether it's water conservation or food security, or perhaps I don't know if in your fieldwork the subject of pollination and preservation of bees was another issue, and all of them can coexist or not coexist. They come to the garden as a place. So perhaps it's conflicting, and there's no possibility to have compatible measures to promote all that we want to have thanks to the gardens. And well, and this is linked, I think, with what Adriana mentioned about the tension between the private and the public space. So how we is if the government should have a policy and placing economic incentives for homeowners that have a certain socioeconomic level, that have a garden, and they are receiving an incentive for changing their ornamental garden. So is it fair instead of having another social policies? And in terms also in this literature of socio-technical controversies is how if this type of policies of loan substitution in this seminar, one of the two questions, guiding questions is who benefits from this type of policy, and where the money comes from, who is gaining from this type of policy that forces homeowners to have a radical change in their property with time consumption, expensive, and all this system of firms of professionalization, certification that creates another configuration, as you mentioned, this urban political ecology. So I thought it's very compelling, and there's not a final answer, but yes. Thanks.
Yep. Let's just
Yep.
Do we want
Oh,
to
sure.
get a bit of
Okay.
comments and then you can, are you okay with that? Yeah.
Je note, je note.
So,
Okay. Como quieras tú.
No, I was just, I think it's very interesting what Jaime was saying about, one of my questions was, I guess, the technical language around this, gives it a sense of a scientificity, perhaps, that I wonder if that is something, like what effect that has on participant, like, not more than what effect it has, it makes it like something that requires, that requires more than just common sense, for example, or, it requires a whole universe of interventions and educate. Yeah, so I wonder what effect this technical language has had, but beyond that, I'm thinking about the lawn versus conservation, and I'm assuming that lawn, what Paul Robbins did with the lawn is, it's a very sort of very aesthetic based, and so the moral judgment, around lawn as an aesthetic thing is very different from conservation. Like, to conserve water, there's a whole new, I think, I would assume, maybe not, there's the judgment placed upon your individual consumption, you as an individual consuming, and the effect that has on a global scale. Like, you suddenly are very responsible for global climate change. Like, what effect does that have, if any? We're talking about, if you don't do this, you're not conserving water. You're contributing to, so that was the second, my second thought. And the third thought is, I don't know, I just find generally the environment, this is out of pure ignorance, so forgive me, but I just generally find the environmental initiatives just so class-based. Because it's about choosing organic products, which end up being much more expensive, and it's choosing so the effect that has is a very, very basic, back to the class-based, divisions where there's certain populations that can and can't participate in these. And the last question, if you have time, if not, don't worry, I'm just curious to know what the incentives are for the participants to go to these workshops. Like, what do they tell you their incentives are? One thing is what the workshop tells you, but I'm curious to know what their incentives are. Why are they there? That's all. Thank you.
no, just to point one comment or question. First of all, thank you for your presentation. Sophie is very generous to share with us in the seminar your fieldwork and findings. And it's really in the core of our seminar concerns, how the specific things are done by authorities and citizens, and how is governed the specific initiatives, the definition of specific policies, and this is really a key for us. Thank you. And I would like to know a little bit more about the choice of device or dispositive category or concept. How useful could be to mobilize a category used for many other things? Is something mobilized to analyze the government action in the specific analysis of in Foucault, especially in Foucault class and college in France. And it's wonderful to see that that's used to analyze something in this context. And I'd like to know why the choice and how useful, productive are you finding the use of this concept?
Not enough time.
I will have to be select. But Jaime, right?
Mhm.
Right? Yeah, you're nailing it with this issue of the fairness of this measure. But it is, I want to make it clear, both the organizers, like that is G3 Group, and the municipalities, they are very aware that this is an issue. But they have to implement things. This is coming from the California legislature, right? So they have to do it their way. And Long Beach, for instance, went, because of its, for those of you who don't know, the city of Long Beach, it's a big city at Southern California level with huge inequalities between the coast, which is super rich, specifically going towards Orange County, and the northern parts of the city that are isolated from the sea, very close to Compton, Watts, historically Black neighborhoods, and with a lot of petroleum industries still there, still very heavy, weighing very heavily on the city politics. And of course, just like any major municipality in Southern California, a super powerful utilities department. Water and power in Southern California, whether Los Angeles, Long Beach, major cities, this is the core of, municipal power usually, this department, right? But they were foreseeing in a way that they systematically, tried to adapt the imperative to, start the incentivization and all that, to try to not be totally unequitable in terms of how they're applying it. They launched the Parkway program. They funded entirely the garden conversion of a specific tract in Long Beach that is the poorest tract in all of Southern California. So they went door to door to say to people, okay, if you want to change this and that, we're going to fund it and we're going to help you do this and it's going to be taken care of, etc. So they're trying to address it the way they can. They're not blind to that, obviously. But eventually, at the end of the day, when you talk to the water officers at the utilities department who are in charge of these water conservation things, they tell you, yeah, we've done a lot of things to do some hands-on, we've done a lot of things to help residents who don't have the means to transform the gardens or the time or the inclination to do so. They even started a program in apartment buildings with raised beds for a little bit of gardening, and they understand that people in the northern parts, when they want to garden, they want to have a vegetable garden. They want to grow, some greens and stuff like that. So they are aware of that, but they say at the end of the day, we know that anyway, these areas, this is not where most of the water is used. So what are we doing? Is it just for show? And it's a good question. And there's also a form of inequity built into the infrastructure itself. Because you can say, okay, this is everybody's using, the water system, which is it's everywhere in Southern California. There's no, private local micro provider. It doesn't exist. It's a network and it's a huge infrastructure in terms of water provision. But there's a second infrastructure, which is the recycled water distribution system. And this recycled water distribution system sits exactly in the most and the wealthiest areas of the city. So there is an inequity in the infrastructure itself, which sort of repercuts. I mean, there's a repercussion in terms of what's going to happen to the gardens, because you cannot use recycled water in these areas because the infrastructure does not go there. So it's a lot of inherited inequalities built into infrastructure, landscape, whatnot, that sort of translates now into the garden. But I totally agree. There's this idea of subsidizing rich homeowners to do something that, they could do with or without. Who cares in a way? it's absolutely true. And who benefits could be a little difficult to figure out right now. But certainly this new economic sector and economic system that's going, for sure, yeah. But I agree, I think it would be unfair to ignore the fact that a lot of providers and municipalities are super aware of that issue. I mean, this is Californian planning. Now Californian planning can be super attentive to built-in inequalities and the effects of this or that policy. And it is couched that way in the legislation. I mean, it's really strong. When I teach the French students and I give them the example of how, you know, in planning documents, you have justice, you know, and they just go, wow, it's crazy, because for them planning is still very technical and let's not do any politics and, you know, that kind of attitude. Very different in some of the documentations in California plan. So they are aware of it, but eventually it boils down to the questions you raise, of course. So yeah. Attachment to the landscape and garden as cultural heritage. This is interesting because, of course, the traditional Californian garden, which was brought about by Mexican practice of irrigation and productive gardens, is seen as the classic traditional Californian garden, but it is also reinvigorated by recent migration and practices, Mexican practices that are reproduced now. And it's interesting, you have this spatio-temporal blurring of things. But I'm always thinking about Hawaii in this case. I'd never been to Hawaii till this year, and it made me think a lot about the plants that we surround ourselves with. In Hawaii, in the garden, in the private gardens and the demonstration gardens and heritage gardens, they identify what they call canoe plants, which are the plants that were brought by the original Polynesians who colonized, I'm not going to say colonized, but who arrived to Hawaii and started making their lives there, coming from other Polynesian islands, the Great Migration of Polynesian people. And they brought with them, you know, coconuts, the coconuts, they brought the taro, they brought a whole variety of plants, medicinal, for food or for lumber for construction, and they are identified in these gardens as canoe plants. So they are not indigenous, but they are identified as a cultural landscape and super important. So in what way and where is this native Californian garden is going to undercut this idea of the Californian traditional garden? I don't know where it's going to go, but it's, you know, it can be touchy. And as you can see with this weird thing about, you know, we're going to make seed bombs, and with the Escobar, which was revered with the local, the traditional American Indians living in Southern California. So where do we go? Where do we go back with this? And it raises a lot of questions regarding, you know, spatio-temporal clashes, and is there a hierarchy we're dealing with that? I don't know, but you know. Veronica, the technical language, it's not very technical. They do, it's a lot of analogy. They work, you know, we have a soil party. It's like there's a big pizza and everybody's getting a share of this or that, you know. It's that kind of phrase, so that people, you know, relate to it and, you know, can discuss. Sometimes the science is really low, but you can have the occasional things, and every time there's a scientific thing, it gets, you know, explained. I'm not gonna use too many of these words, but just think about it as a big, you know, soil party. And there you go. And then
we're nitrogen and not,
exactly gets introduced to. And the worms, basically, how to inoculate your soil and all that, all the techniques to bring about your soil. A lot of the Californian soil is clayish and not very fit for gardening, actually. The second thing, aesthetic, very different from conservation issues. And why are participants there? They want to change. So they're already there. I mean, it's where the outreach fails in a way. If you think about, if you want to do this thing to the max, if you don't have reservations with it to begin with, if you want to do things to the max, then to figure out, public policy design that will actually be efficient. The people who attend are already people who are in the process of changing their garden. So they're looking for tips, they're looking for help. They're looking for answers to the very technical questions that they have. And sometimes it's super technical questions. For instance, during one of the workshops, there was a lady and she said, okay, I understand that yarrow is the next step in terms of, replacing your lawn, yarrow. Anyway. I love yarrow, it's fantastic. But my problem is I'm also a part of the Mojave tortoise conservation group. And I have some tortoise that are salvaged from the desert areas. And if they eat yarrow, they're gonna die. So what can I do? How can I replace yarrow? So it's if you think again as the garden as a habitat as well. So yarrow's gonna be out if you want to have turtles, but it's gonna be great if you want to have dogs. How do you interpret all that? And people come with very specific questions. And sometimes the instructors, we don't know, and I'm not sure, and I have to look into that and just go after the workshop, they just go, I didn't learn anything. It was soil thing, the soil party, again. And they can be very critical because they don't get straight answers to their actual problems. So what the group does, they also have clinics, and this is new. They're gonna have more hands-on workshops, just like what Long Beach does, which is really great, in my opinion. If you really want to do it, you get your hands in the dirt, right? You don't do it in a PowerPoint. But they also have clinics now, which is if you have a plan to transform your garden, you can come. There's a landscape architect and there's a nursery, a person from a nursery there, and they will guide you through the process and help you design the garden. But when it comes to maintenance, it's a little more, difficult, and it's the long run. This is where most of the projects tank usually. I mean, it looks good during a couple of months and then it just dies out. Because the plant is not adapted to that particular environment, exposure, whatnot. Rocky soil, clay soil, caliche, all that. I mean, there's a whole lot of different components to it. And this is why participants are there. They want answers to their questions. And yes, class-based divisions, we talked about it. Foucault, I have colleagues who are deep, heavily into that. But I think it could be, but I don't know if it's been done for, plants and landscapes. And I think it could be an interesting way, but I have to look into that a lot more. I'm just doing name dropping at this stage. I'm just, you see what I'm toying with an idea. It echoes something, then I put it down on paper, but eventually I will probably drop 1 or 2 or 3 interpretations and just go for one because it's also easier. But I wanted to do it that way. I've seen my friend and colleague, Marianne Morange, we often write together, and we did a lot of things together in South Africa about, the governance of street trade, for instance. And Marianne is heavily into Foucault. She wrote her habilitation, her second thesis, her professorship thesis, just using Foucault, but really deeply, not just superficially like me, really deeply to understand the governing of bodies in public space and the bodies of street traders and the different ways of, having them co-opt and adhere to what was proposed in a context of African entrepreneurialism, et cetera. So, and she had 3 different theoretical threads to read the same object, which was a market in Cape Town where you had, curio traders, and who are registered as street traders with the municipality, and how the municipality sort of shapes their relation to their clients, to the street, to what they sell, and basically to their behavior in public space. And that was pretty impressive. I'm not there yet, but I was also, she had 3 different theories. One would be classic, neoliberalism, there's the punishment of street traders and they force them to coercion, blah, 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 and all that. So that would be one interpretation. The second one would be more Foucauldian in terms of the government of conduct, something more subtle. Coercion is not there as much, but they sort of understand and adhere to the principles that are applied. So there's a back and forth between the traders and the municipality, sort of all contributing to a specific understanding of what is street trade today. And there was a third interpretation. I'm not going to go into detail, but you see my point. This idea that you take an object like a market or a lawn, a garden, or something else, and then you can pull threads. They are not, it's not to say that one is better than the other. They don't explain exactly the same thing, but it can work. And then, whatever you fancy, you go one way or the other, but just to sort of put it down there and try to figure out the futures of this particular object. I kind of like the idea that it helps you toy with and understand theory as well, so that you won't be totally blinded by one kind of theory. You will also consider something else, another type of interpretation that can lead you somewhere else altogether. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff in there. I'm not sure how I'm going to write this, but I might be needing 2, 3, 4, 5 papers around this, but that might be a bit too much after a while, just writing about the same thing 4 times. But yeah, that's my point. It can go in very different directions, and it's exciting, I think.
It is indeed very exciting. I very much like the idea of the garden as an assemblage, as you said, as a dispositif, as a policy object, as a habitat, and also as a time-space compression, right? The scales and the temporality. And so I think it's a very powerful empirical and theoretical strategy. And yes, so thank you very much, Sophie, for sharing your ongoing research today. And thank you to everyone for their comments. Thank you, Adriana, specifically for commenting.
Thank you.
And we'll see each other next semester, I guess, for the next session of your seminar. Thank you.
¿Tienes que pasar la tradición? ¿O
¿Cómo se para esto?
ahorita ya les estoy avisando?
We have to say goodbye.
No natural.
Did you just arrive or are you on your way out or to Mexico?
Oh, I just got it on Saturday.
Okay,
actually.
so you have a few days.
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
That's great.
I'm going to the conference organized by LAPSIT at the end of the week.
Yeah.
And I also need to check in with people at SEMCA and to discuss what could be done with Iglobes.
Yeah. Okay, great.
A lot of prospective
Yeah.
connections.
Yeah. So it's a week you're here, a bit more? Okay. A very busy week then.
Busy week.
Yeah.
He has 4 days of conferences.
My goodness.
Yes. In Spanish. My goodness. I have to up my game.
Gracias.
Yeah.
Ya, ahora sí. Super.
Ça va, on était loin. On voit pas trop quand on fait des.
Yeah.